Sound check 1. Good morning. Welcome to the Audit, Finance, and Communicate. Blech. I'm sorry. Today is an early morning and there was a late night last night. So it's the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee. Welcome, counselors, staff, and public. I'd like to call this meeting to order. In chambers with me is Councillor M. Wilson, Councillor Taddison, Councillor Kretsch, Councillor Clark, Councillor A. Wilson, and Councillor Beatty is online. Thank you for being there. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings, and please note that quorum is present. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to this agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are a few changes to the agenda. First, we have under item 8, staff presentations. Item 8.1A, corporate real estate leases and licensing audit, AUD 24005 citywide, was originally added item 8.1 and has been revised, so it's 8.1A. We have a new added discussion item. Item 10.1 is the Governance Review Subcommittee meeting, Governance Review Subcommittee Report 24001 from September 13th, 2024. And we have under item 12, a notice of motion, 12.1 Ward 13 community grants, Q2 and Q3 2024. And for that item, a request to waive the rules will be introduced.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. Welcome, Vice Chair Spadafora. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended, please? Councillor Alex Wilson, Councillor Kretsch. Any discussion on this agenda? Seeing none, may I have your vote, please? Vote is up.
Just waiting for Councillor Beatty. Where did he go? Councillor Beatty, are you able to vote? Thumbs up, thank you.
And that vote carries 8-0. Thank you. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of minutes. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of meetings on September 5th, 2024? Councillor Taddison and Councillor Spadafora, please. Any discussion on the approval of the minutes? Seeing none, may I have the vote, please? Vote is up.
Again, Councillor Beatty. Thumbs up, thank you.
And that carries 8-0, thank you. Moving on to staff presentations. 8.1 is the corporate real estate leases and licensing audit. I'd like to call upon our Auditor General, Charles Brown, to come down to the podium and begin your presentation. Also online is Bridget Menard, Deputy Auditor General, and Dominic Pellegrini, Senior Audit and Investigation Specialist, is here in chambers with us. We're just getting the presentation set up. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So through the chair, I'm Charles Brown, Auditor General, and I'm here today to present the results on audit of leases and licenses administration, how effectively generally that administration is, and how it could be improved. Our audit was focused on lease out arrangements or revenue leases where the city acts as landlord. We did not include a review of leases that involve any complex arrangements For example, development deals that may have a lease out component to them, that was not included in our scope. As well, this report does not include our review of the processes surrounding a new lease arrangement involving Waterfront Trust and Williams Cafe. That work is underway and will be brought forward in a separate standalone report. A few things to know before we get started. What a lease is. It's a contract that confers exclusive possession of a property to a lessee. There are leases that are active and current, and that means there's an agreement or a lease that is currently in force. It hasn't expired. There are leases that are active and in overhold, and that means that there's an ongoing tenancy, but the lease has expired and is continuing on a month-to-month basis. And then there are inactive leases. A license is similar to a lease, but does not confer exclusive possession of a property. It only gives the licensee the right of use in a certain manner. There are multiple actors that play a role in lease administration. There's corporate real estate that is involved in negotiating the terms and conditions of a lease, for example. There's recreation division that carries on a primary role in managing licenses. There's corporate facilities that manages leases on a day-to-day basis with respect to those that are applicable to properties in the public works portfolio. And there's legal that assists with drafting of leases and any legal issues that arise in the course of administering a lease. All these areas participate jointly and collectively in the process of lease and license administration. The objective of our audit was to assess whether the administration of leases and licenses is efficient and effective and provides reasonable assurance that assets are appropriately safeguarded and revenues maximized. In the audit, we did a comprehensive analysis of the database of leases and licenses. We interviewed staff, we got familiar with the processes, and we educated ourselves about what other municipalities are doing. I'll just provide a brief summary of some of the issues contained in our report. From a governance perspective, we looked at delegations of authority and found that they should be updated, and that it would also be beneficial to include them in the city's policy framework, making them more transparent and readily available. We also found that there are some agreements that define various roles and responsibilities that do exist in leasing, but they need to be updated as well. From a systems perspective, the main system for lease administration is Archibus, and more recently a system called Tracker. Archibus has a number of challenges, not right protected. It is vulnerable to undetected or untraceable editing. The information contained in it is prone to error or incompleteness. And we found that there were significant discrepancies between information that the different systems all provided, even about the same lease. License administration uses a software called Legend, and we found similar issues. Most importantly, the systems used for administration lack the complete functionality and reliability of a fully integrated solution, and we think it would be advantageous to consider pursuing an integrated solution. In looking at processes of administration, we found that in practice, they are inefficient and prone to error. I think a contributing factor is the fragmented system of delivery through multiple parties, all parties who have unique pressures, priorities, skill sets, and knowledge. The current approach, the way administration is organized, does not, in particular the way it's organized, does not appear to be meeting the city's needs. There are cases described at the back of our report that illustrate that. The program areas have recognized this, and centralization has been discussed to improve the situation. And in fact, Corporate Real Estate Office commissioned a study by a consultant firm to look at that as well as the processes. We also observed that the city needs to have a more comprehensive policy framework that establishes the key policies, requirements, rules, decision criteria, guidance, checklists, and have standard operating procedures for essential tasks. There's also an opportunity to streamline and maximize legal review efficiency by moving in the direction of standardized agreements for leases. This is something actually that's already being done for licenses. We think it would be beneficial to move that forward as well for leases. With respect to below market rents that are charged to some tenants, we noted that the procedures here could be enhanced for making those determinations. So with any space that is rented at below market there is an implied subsidy. And it's our view that these cases should be demonstrably in the public interest and also allow for fair access to those opportunities and be transparent in the way that grants are treated, because in effect they are a subsidy. We found that there was significant improvement needed in the management of collections and arrears. Basically, there were two issues. There's the avoiding of arrears in the first place, and then there's the process of actually taking action as arrears develop and taking action in a timely manner, and both of these areas could be improved. We concluded that in both of these aspects, current processes are not up to the task, and we found that as of the date of the audit, there were accumulated arrears that were unlikely to be at least fully collected, amounting to $1.2 million. We also found that there were a significant number of overholds. These are cases where an agreement has expired, a lease agreement or license has expired, and the tenancy continues on a month-to-month basis. And this often goes on for very long periods of time. You can see in the chart, for example, that of the leases that are in overhold, some 31, 65% of those in overhold are 3 or more years long. Now, that's the period of time in overhold. And in some of these cases, we also found there was no clause in the lease agreement regarding automatic increase in rent when something goes into overhold. And so these leases were continuing for years with no increase in rent. The situation with licenses in overhold was very similar, with about 73% being 3 or more years in overhold. So in our report, we call for a more expeditious treatment of the overholds and clearing up of all of that backlog. Finally, in the back of our report, there are some case examples of different situations where the city got into issues of arrears, and the specific circumstances is described in there, how these situations developed, as well as some other issues that we uncovered in our examination. I'll just mention a couple of them. I'll go through all of them. They're clearly, they're very fully articulated in the report. But for example, case one, Company A, that one tells the story of late invoicing, where arrears were developing right from the get-go, from the first months, and action was not taken. So it ended up accumulating to $720,000. That was similar for case number 2, Company B. There's a typo here. It's not that invoicing started 10 months after the lease began. It's that payments started 10 months right after the lease began. So really, that's an issue of taking action sooner rather than later when a tenant gets behind. There's a rather interesting one, and just draw your attention to, where a company was being invoiced for rent and paying, albeit it's a small amount, but they've been paying that lease for 33 years, even though the lease terminated and was vacated 33 years ago. It's kind of interesting. Another case where the delegation of authority was signed off, everything, monthly rent determined, $3,000 a month, but it was simply forgotten about for 4 years, with Company H using the property rent-free. We made 35 recommendations for improvement, and management agreed with all of the recommendations. And so that concludes my presentation. I do want to thank our team for their diligent efforts, most notably Dominic Pellegrini, who's here with me today. And I also want to convey my thanks to the staff in corporate real estate, facilities, recreation, and legal, who gave us their full cooperation and showed us every courtesy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we pull down the screen? Speakers list is open. I recognize Councillor Kretsch, followed by Councillor A. Wilson. Councillor Kretsch, please.
Quick question before I say anything, just wanting to understand what we're doing. Sometimes we will ask questions of the presenter and then make comments while the presenter is there. Sometimes the presenter will sit down. Sometimes we'll set, like, what's the plan for today?
I was planning to follow the rule book, which was asking questions on the presentation. No. Okay. I see. Asking questions of the presentation, receiving said presentation, then we will open up for report, and then asking questions on the report, followed by the receipt of the report.
Great, I'd rather stay on for the report. I have comments to make about the report, but I don't have questions about specifically the slides that were presented, so I'm happy to receive that and then go on to the comments with the report. Thanks.
All right, so on the presentation, I have Councillor Clark then.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, Auditor General. Your report was most enlightening. Have you, in your past experiences, found a leasing division with this many deficiencies?
I can't say that I have, but that's only because I haven't looked at in detail at other functions, so I couldn't really fairly comment on that. I can say that, though, that there are similar challenges with, if you looked at the consulting report that was commissioned by Real Estate Office, they went out and benchmarked against, I think it was 4 other municipalities. You don't see all of the issues, but you see similar issues cropping up with some municipalities.
I have a question about Appendix A, about the language. Can I ask it? Appendix A.
I think I'd like to keep it for when we have the report on the floor.
No problem. Those are all my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tadison, on the presentation, please.
Good day. Thanks for the presentation. I guess what I'm saying here, or my question will be about your presentation, and if I delve into the report, just stop me. Overall, your presentation's highlighting the deficiencies and so forth, and that's your job, is to find and make improvements. Overall then, what's the grading here in sense of like, I know you're highlighting the deficiencies. What about the capacity of are things working well as well on the other side? To give a balanced presentation, I guess?
So let me just say that I do want to avoid a grade. What I can highlight is maybe the more significant issues, and that is, that are crucial, that really have to be addressed, and that is the management overhauls, the management of collections and arrears, and the systems themselves. I think that there are two major contributing factors to the situation, possibly more. The lease administration systems themselves are archaic and they're not full solutions. There's high risk of error. The other is the way lease administration is deployed, how it's organized. And arguably, you know, I think part of that is capacity and resourcing of the actual need. And that's an element that is explored in more depth in the consulting report that was commissioned.
Okay, thanks for that. That gives me some greater context to put it in place. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing as there are no other speakers, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation? Councillor Crutch, Councillor Alex Wilson, please. And may I have your vote? Vote is up.
I've got you, Councillor Beattie.
And that carries 8-0. Thank you. Now we are on to the report. I recognize that this probably could have been tightened up a little bit more. So moving forward, I'll try and tighten up this receipt of the presentation and the report ready to go. So mover and a seconder, Councillor Crutch and Councillor Alex Wilson. I want to go back to Councillor Crutch first, followed by Councillor Alex Wilson, followed by Councillor Clark. So Councillor Crutch, please.
Really thorough report from the Auditor General here with a long list of recommendations. Appreciate the appendices, and I'll also say appreciate the layout change. I see you've kind of done something different here with the presentation and some of the slides and things, so appreciate it's a little bit clearer than it has been in the past, and I appreciate that as well. I don't have a lot of questions because of the thoroughness. It was so clear and direct. I understand why you had to protect a lot of the individuals who were involved in this in terms of calling them, you know, Company A, Company B, Company LMNOP, and that makes sense. Though, of course, having some of that information would provide a bit more insight to understand the context. The things that I want to highlight in my comments are the fact that we appear to have lost $1.2 million in arrears that will likely not be fully collected. That there are a high number of expired leases that are kind of just in the ether. That we have, generally speaking, as far as I understand this, a lack of standard operating procedures in some areas, including standardized leases. And finally, something that I think is deeply concerning for a couple of cultural reasons is companies using the property rent-free. Why is that, to me, stand out as probably the thing in this? Because every single one of these things, as far as I'm concerned, is quite concerning. Every single thing you've asked for changes on. I'm glad people are making the changes, but why does that one stand out to me? Well, it's the same reason that I've spoken out publicly before about my concerns for the way that we secure some of our housing facilities. When people in the community know that certain housing facilities that are public are not secured, then they know those are vulnerable, and then they may do things there they wouldn't do elsewhere. Same applies here. It's clear that the person paying the rent rented the premises, right, and knew that they were there, and knew that rent was due, and that they felt it was okay to just not pay rent, seemingly knowing that we didn't have the checks and balances in place to be able to ensure they paid rent or paid their lease or whatever the exact amounts might have been. That's like deeply disturbing to me, that there are people in our community who think the city of Hamilton is someone who won't follow through on its obligations and someone who won't follow through on its contracts, and they could get away for years without paying rent for a facility they were using. I'm going to wait to reserve my comments in general, I think, until the next audit on this with respect to the Hamilton Waterfront Trust and Pier 7 leases comes out, because I feel like that's maybe perhaps a further clarification about some of the practices here. But I hope everyone in staff is as disturbed as I am by this report, that those 4 things I mentioned could be going on across the division here seemingly without oversight, and requiring the Auditor General to come step in to provide these recommendations, which frankly, many of them are just so basic to the fundamental operating of the city of Hamilton and our lease division, that for them not to be in place should be a huge red flag and an alarm call to everyone that something is deeply not working. So I don't have any things to say apart or questions. Of course, I'm going to support the auditor's recommendations, and I'm glad the staff have taken them, but I really think this requires a more serious discussion somewhere, because these are fundamental building blocks for us to successfully manage and negotiate leases in our city. And if we don't have these things in place, or they haven't been in place for some time, an audit is certainly a great tool to help us get back on track. But how they ever got to this place in the first point is a mystery to me, and should be fully thought about and investigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Up now is Councillor Alex Wilson, followed by Councillor Clark and Councillor M. Wilson. Alex Wilson, please.
Yeah, how do we get there in this place is, I think, actually the root of my questions, and it's a question to the auditor team, just wondering about the scope of the data set that was used. So when we're looking at some of these leases, let's talk about below market rate leases, for example. Was an analysis done as to the origin of those? I just would be particularly curious if the origin of those came from ward councillor motions versus if it came from a staff report, as I think that helps understand, like, over several decades, we've got to this point in time. I can think of, in this term of council, a lease in Ward 13 that was citywide, that was done below market, very intentional throughout the process that it came kind of from the real estate division, not a council. Just wondering if that was in scope, like the origin of some of these agreements, because they all have to go through this body eventually, but they can get here many different ways.
Auditor General? Microphone. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. If I understand the question, I think a lot of the issues are derived from the fact, particularly with respect to the long-term nature of some of these leases, it goes back to pre-amalgamation.
That was my, thank you. That was
It's
my
kind of it continues on, and it's never been fully dealt with. And it's another reason perhaps to look at a more fully integrated solution from a systems perspective, and really recast the whole inventory into a new system. Might be a way to go. Not knowing the cost, that's obviously something to figure out and to present to council, whether it's passes a cost benefit threshold.
Thank you. So just so I understand, so the origin of necessarily the agreement wasn't necessarily in scope. That makes sense. That's a pretty fine detail, but just a comment on the scope of or the origins. Many of these are predating amalgamation, or some are predating amalgamation. That's anecdotally lines up with my experience as a counselor in a pre-amalgamation community. I'd say most of the leases I've had have been overdue for quite some time as a result of exactly that.
Through the chair, that's correct. But also in our report, we did say that some of these agreements that are older need to be recast into a more standard form of agreement, because standards for agreements, leases, they have those kinds of standards evolve in terms of the terms and conditions you typically have in the language and so forth. And it's just not kept up to date. So you get this world where it's kind of an archaic mixture of different types of lease agreements. And so that was another part of our report, another comment that we made in the report. I didn't mention in the presentation, but it's in there.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. It also having a standard lease is just more efficient for community groups. We can move a little bit faster. Just another question for the auditor team, and then a couple questions for on the management responses side, but just kind of an overall given the importance of a holistic review, given the 35 recommendations, my understanding is it's, I believe, agree to all the responses as well. Having a timeline, I think most of the dates are somewhere in 2026. Are there areas where, in reviewing the management responses, there's a concern that we're not quite getting close enough, or just any kind of comments on those responses if we're addressing the gaps that you've identified, or if the actions there? Does that make sense? Like a comment on those 35 responses, and if there's areas where you think there might still be a gap, even if those actions that are good are taken, we still may have a remaining gap afterwards.
So I think it addresses, the responses address all the areas of our concern, at least in a satisfactory manner. I think the highest risk that I see in the responses is a lot is dependent on that whole reorganization and restructuring and where that goes. And so that's a very important decision that I assume will be brought forward to council, that council needs to really seriously consider and go over. That's my suggestion.
Thank you.
Councillor?
Yes, through you, Chair, just a couple questions on the other side. So we need a centralized process. We need a more rigorous process. That makes sense. We also have a very divided system. My line of sight is working with facilities on activating some of our facility-owned public spaces, going through public expressions of interest, public processes. Yes, there may be a discounted lease at the end, but we're talking about recovering the operating costs for the building, so below market, but there's a piece there. That's all work that's underway, and it seems like through this iterative work with facilities, we've been developing maybe best practices or future things that might be rolled out. And so now, just given that that's where my line of sight, that's where my kind of focus as a ward councillor has been on this issue. How does that line up with the centralized, I guess, how do we have a centralized approach to solving this when we also have many different silos having their role? And so maybe a question, I think, for some of our GMs or some of that folks is, how is this actually kind of looking in different departments? Because I think these management responses overall talk about it, but I don't necessarily know if the response in facilities is going to be different than the response in rec, different than the response in corporate real estate. I'm just wondering if some of those, if there's maybe a bit of a work planning piece that can be brought forward, or as we're standardizing these pieces, what's already maybe in the works that's being built upon. Just because it does, like, again, my point here is, I've had some work with facilities. It seems like a lot of this is actually already ongoing, and I just wouldn't want like a standardization to slow down that work that's already going on in that department to get to some of these outcomes. And so wondering, given that we're such a big city, how that's being taken up by management.
City manager, do you want to direct that to the next?
Through you, Madam Chair. So I'll start actually on this one, because I think that this is a broader look because it's cross-departmental, which is to your point. So I think our plan needs to be looking at the structure of it more comprehensively, and that's part of the action coming through it, and how we collaborate and how we make sure that all departments are acting consistently wherever possible. I mean, there are some nuances, of course, so you have to be flexible, but you want the standardization where you can, you want consistency, we want standard operating procedures and all of that that's built in. One of the core pieces to the success of this, I would say, is making sure that you have a champion and someone that oversees what's happening. And that's also built into the response that staff has put together, where it's identifying that real estate is the group that really needs to have that oversight because they have that expertise. Not that there's not expertise elsewhere, but it just rightfully sits there. And then how we make sure that it's rolled out, as well as where we can bring groups together, we do. So that work is not fully fleshed out at this point. That's identified in the plan, but that needs to come forward. If there are restructuring pieces associated with it, it's timely, because as a new city manager, of course, I look at our structure overall and how we might be as effective and efficient as possible, and that would be one component as well. So I'll stop there and I'll look to my colleagues to see if GM Robichaud wants to respond at all. He says no. And if GM Can wants to respond at all.
I'm not sure.
That's fine with, I think that does make sense. Very happy that, I think, just last question for me, if I can take your indulgence, Chair. I think my piece here is, I'm seeing the compliance timeline and we do need processes in place. And I guess maybe to say this differently is, but there's also things that we could just do as a matter of practice tomorrow that are happening in some of our departments already. And that's the pieces I just didn't want to lose the quick wins in the comprehensive response. So for example, there's nothing stopping us from just having public RFPs or expressions of interest for all future leases from next week on, for example, like as opposed to doing that aren't already in the works. Like some of those things, if you're talking about a nonprofit lease in a city facility or something like that, going through an RFP versus picking a preferred partner, that's a quick change, and that's already happening, I guess, in some of the divisions across the city for some of these spaces. And that was more my pieces. How are those early pieces going to be proliferated across the departments while we're doing a comprehensive piece, while there's a centralized system being put in place? Yes, we need a database, but also there's just things that we can change right away.
City Manager?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I didn't pick up on that piece of your question. So yes, because you have to do the strategy piece, but there's also the pieces that you do as quick wins and you can immediately action. So I can tell you, and I can't get into the specifics, but perhaps Mr. Kessler can, but I'll tell you that even before coming forward, we met as a group. So myself and the GMs, because it's that important. It's important that we're continuously improving, and I know that our GMs and our teams are committed to that. So when they saw the recommendations coming out, they concurred and they sat down and thought about how we action these items. And with that commitment, I saw a commitment to wanting to make those changes. So now it's about identifying those quick wins, as you say, and doing those straight away while concurrently planning. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Kessler and see if he has any comments about the specifics of some of those quick wins.
Chief Real Estate Officer, please.
Through the chairs, Ray Kessler, Chief Corporate Real Estate Officer. Thank you for that question. We are not looking to, I think the best way to address this is we're not looking to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are some existing continuous improvement efforts that have been going on for a number of years. And while certainly weaknesses in the system have been articulated and identified through the auditor's report, where we are making progress, we will continue to use that progress. And so as we look to really address the question of the oversight role, the question of bringing some consistency and some centralization to our processes, we are really going to be looking to use what's working well, including those things that are currently ongoing in terms of making improvements, whether that's through our collections processes, whether that's through just some of our day-to-day lease administration activities. And I know as an example, recreation has done a fairly good job of standardizing some of the the license administration pieces and have made some good efforts there. That is all going to be useful as we try to move this entire system forward.
Thank you. Councillor Betts?
Yeah, past my time, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, please, followed by Councillor M. Wilson. Councillor Clark?
This report was difficult to read. And I have concerns when I read page 12 of the presentation. What we found: administration, inefficient, error-prone, and missed opportunities. Current approach not serving the city's needs, not serving the city's needs. Procedures, roles, criteria are not comprehensive or fulsome and lack detail. I'm concerned when I hear statements like we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is inconsistent with what I'm reading here from the auditor. It says that the administration was inefficient, error-prone, and they missed opportunities. So how are we going to tackle that? And how do we ensure that the taxpayers are getting the best value for dollar when we're not collecting on leases? Like, when you read this report, it's not a question of, okay, go away and fix this. The Auditor General is bringing out stark reasons for concern about the administration of the department. So my question to the city manager, how are we going to tackle the issue about delegating authorities?
City manager?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the report has highlighted some areas for significant changes. And I'll start with that we are committed to making those changes that are needed. It's been a long evolution of this, and I think the staff have definitely attempted to do the right thing, and there are some areas of strength there, but clearly there are some areas that we also need to improve upon. I want to just clarify that it isn't one department, and I think that's one of the issues, is that this crosses departments, making it more challenging. And so part of that is looking at how we simply streamline, how we have some consistencies, and how we bring things together where we can. And again, I'll reiterate the importance of having a champion and some oversight to that. So some of that are the pieces. In terms of delegated authority, that's another piece that we have to look at. So the action plan is detailed in the responses, but there is a more detailed plan that we will come up with when we take this away and begin with this. I'm going to look at the GMs as well to see if they have anything to add. Go ahead.
GM Burden, please.
Good morning. Angie Burden, General Manager of Community Services, through you, Chair, to the committee. Also mindful of some of the work underway. For speaking example for recreation, we have a partnership framework that is under development that is part of the Rec Master Plan, the implementation plan that will be coming forward in Q1 of next year, which council will be able to see then some of the work that Marnie has been discussing that has been ongoing. And to Councillor Wilson's earlier point, respecting licenses, for sites where we don't currently have an operator, we will be immediately implementing current process and standardization in those new opportunities. Staff is very committed to responding to the recommendations in the Auditor General's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you. Next question is to the Auditor General. Given what you have found in your report, did you have an estimation of the losses of revenue to the municipality?
Auditor General?
Through you, Chair, well, I think a significant portion of that 1.2 million is at risk, yes.
Is there, in your audit, did you find how the decisions were being made to not charge a lease at market value? Who was making those decisions?
Through the chair, so there's a process and there were criteria. We just think that that should be enhanced. It goes way back to a policy that was developed in a document that was presented, oh gosh, years ago, I think 2006, 7, I could be wrong about the date, it was quite some time ago, which laid out very, very well the principles that should be adhered to in terms of market rents. In fact, originally, the council of the day decided there should be no below market rents. They wanted it to be a system where you would actually get a subsidy to pay the rent to the city, so that it would be more transparent. That kind of fell by the wayside into the current below market, but they do have some criteria, We just think that they need to be more fulsome, more transparent to the public, and there should be resolve to make sure that at some point, at some threshold that is defined, that those decisions are brought forward to council where there are significant implied, we call them implied subsidies, that are at issue.
Yes, I would agree with that. I guess I'm concerned as to who is making the decisions to lease out a property that the city owns below market rent. And so far in here, I've not been able to find that criteria that you indicated they follow and who follows it. And that goes back to my concerns about the delegated authority and the roles and responsibilities. Deputy Mayor, I don't think I'm alone in saying that this report was disconcerting because licenses, leases, those are all revenue tools for the city of Hamilton.
Agreed.
And we've been increasing taxes because we don't have the revenue.
Right.
And then to find that we're not charging market rent is disconcerting, let alone a number of the other issues that were in this report where people just seem to lose sight of I guess, the lease and the policies. So I am truly concerned. I hope that there will be report backs to this committee in terms of how the city manager and the senior leadership team are moving forward with changes to correct this. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I've made a note on that. Did you want at some point to move some sort of direction at some point after our discussion? Okay, thank you. Up now is Counselor Maureen Wilson and then followed by Counselor Taddison. Counselor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to the auditor, could you just remind me how this audit was triggered? Was it on your pre-existing work plan or something else? I don't remember. Thank you, through the chair.
Auditor General?
Through the chair. So it was triggered by an investigation that we did, and in the course of doing an investigation work on a complaint to our hotline, we saw issues with the way leases and licenses were administered. So that prompted us to put it on, I believe it's on the latest audit work plan. That's the reason that we put it on.
Counselor?
Thank you, I appreciate that. My other question, if it's appropriate, corporately, are we satisfied? I've heard in my tenure here over the course of some years reference to pre-amalgamation, post-amalgamation. It has been coming up 24 years. And I'm just wondering if we have corporate confidence that we have everything consistent and up to date and accounted for that may be some legacy pieces, through the chair.
I'm going to ask Auditor General first, and then if there are any other senior leadership team that would like to weigh in. So Auditor General, please.
So through you, Chair, I can't say specifically or categorically give an answer to that. It's certainly a risk. You know, we looked at, as I said, we looked at agreements that are long-standing agreements from years ago, pre-amalgamation, and just not up to a modern standard. That's an example of something that we found. As to the, you know, whether there's inventory out there that we're not aware of, or couldn't speak to that. Obviously, we found what we found. I don't know if the program areas have any information they can convey about their confidence in that particular issue.
GM Zagaric, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as noted in the auditor's recommendation and management agreement is a intent to review lease agreements in the form of the lease agreements and ensure there's some standardization of the lease agreements. And that forms part of the collective ownership and the effort from corporate services as well. I'll expand as it relates to corporate services. We see the need to improve the relationship between corporate services and our client group areas, the business areas, as it relates to receivables and arrears and collections. And while there are procedures, we need to enhance and improve those procedures so that there's a collective interest as it relates to realizing the full revenue potential owed to the city of Hamilton. And so that is an opportunity for us to embrace and embark on by Q1 of 2025 to ensure those procedures are enhanced and aligned to that collective goal. And that is our commitment in part through the response of our management.
Thank you, GM. City Manager, did you want to add on at all?
Through the chair, no, I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you. My final question, I think, was partially answered by the Auditor General disclosing how this audit came about. And I thought it might be a question, but perhaps it's more of a comment. To the Auditor General, you've emphasized the importance of good process, coordination, measures of accountability, and I'm supposing all of those things in combination would enable a city employee to have the ability to highlight an oversight, something that didn't look right, didn't smell right, or just a human error. And my concern is more to the larger cultural piece, that we have a city culture, which we say we want to express and attain excellence, that we have that ability. So I guess my question through the chair is, in your interviews, did you find anything that may have disrupted or frustrated that ability, in your opinion, for an employee to, when they're in the course of doing their work, they found something like, oh, hey, this lease has not been paid for 30 years, something like that, through the chair.
To the Auditor General, please.
Through the chair, thanks for the question. I think in terms of factors that would frustrate those, that good intent and those good procedures and so forth, one would be systems and the fact that they're dependent on so much on human interaction and intervention. And that's what we mean by exploring a fully integrated solution, which is integrated, by the way, with the finance function, especially when it comes to receivables, collections, et cetera. And it's not in this report, but something to consider, the impact of the cybersecurity incident, right, on our systems. While that might pose a challenge, and certainly does, I suspect, on managing these issues, it's probably also an opportunity, to rethink what's out there in terms of a solution? Can this be redesigned in a way? The other thing is certainly one might have the processes, but it's about following the processes. And that inevitably becomes an issue of capacity. But also in this case, what's I think particularly challenging, and I think it's the reason that the program area, the real estate office itself was considering centralization, and that is when you get fragmented accountability like this, you have a number of different, up to 4 parties playing different roles, all to do with the administration of one lease. You have the potential for things to fall through the cracks in terms of lack of coordination. I think that's a significant contributing factor. You know, the idea of centralization, and that's an idea that corporate real estate wanted to pursue, and they did hire outside expertise to help with that. What we ended up saying, and as Councillor Clark pointed out, pretty strong language. And what we mean by that strong language is regardless of whether you go down the path of centralization or something else, regardless of, and it's on page 13, I draw your attention to the second paragraph, second half of the second paragraph, regardless of the direction they choose to go. However, we would advocate that the status quo is not a viable way forward for meaningful improvement. That's really what we're talking about here. So I hope that addresses your question.
Counselor?
Thank you. Just a brief comment from me. I don't want to look like I'm piling on, but this report is very unsettling. We're a billion-dollar corporation.
2 billion, actually.
2 billion, thank you. And our efforts, when we do go to the public, the only capital we have is trust and confidence. And if we're asking people to pay more, do more, or go without, this undermines that currency. And I do appreciate the work of the Auditor General and bringing this to our attention. And I think we all will have lean into our role and responsibility to ensure success, but ultimately to uphold trust and confidence, because this was a really hard, difficult report to read. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Up now is Councillor Taddison, followed by a second-time speaker, Councillor Clark. Councillor Taddison, please.
Not to go against the grain, but on page 29 of 38 in Appendix A, what I see is it says, out of 85 leases that were actively being managed, 8 experienced collection issues. Does anyone up there on the bench have an understanding of, in the broader market, what the rate would be where we would experience, where the broader market would experience collection issues? To me, that's like 10%. So 9 out of 10 successful collections and 1 unsuccessful. So we're really focusing on that 1 unsuccessful and highlighting that right now. Is that something that's standard, or do other corporations have the ability to just, go in and move somebody out that's not making payments? What's out there in the private market compared to this public?
Auditor General, please.
Is that a question for?
I think it's for anyone up there who has experience with.
I mean, I'll go first, offer some thoughts. I mean, we don't look at the whole standard, whether there is a standard. I guess whether or not that's a standard percentage, to me, that's the issue more is the quantum of and length of time that this goes on and on and on and accumulates to such large amounts. We're talking about, I mean, lease revenue itself is, I think, around 2 million a year. So when you're looking at arrears of 1.2 million and the annual amount of revenue is 2 million, to me, that's eye-popping.
City Manager, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, I will redirect this to Chief Real Estate Officer Ray Kessler, who's online.
Mr. Kessler, perfect.
Yes, through the chair, I think different organizations respond differently to this particular issue. If I could just clarify in terms of annual revenue, I think we're closer to the $8 million a year revenue figure. But more precisely, I think in the private sector, what you typically get, and I can echo my experience, both having observed some work being done on this particular issue in Ottawa was City of Ottawa, City of Mississauga, and the City of Toronto have all had similar kinds of reviews and similar types of responses in terms of addressing the issue that is in front of us today. I think in general, the private sector takes a very, very aggressive approach to lease administration, and some of their systems reflect that. So a typical approach would be 3 days after rent is not paid, they're already sending out dunning letters, and I won't get into too much detail. But there are different approaches taken. There are circumstances under which you may not be quite as aggressive because it might play against some of your broader objectives. So as an example, during COVID, if, there are a number of landlords who are trying to work with their tenants around ensuring that they had tenants at the end of it, as an example. So they may not have been aggressive at certain time periods. And so in that regard, are there metrics that can be used? I think generally the rule of thumb is somewhere around between 5 and 10% of your agreements in some form of overhold is kind of the maximum that you want to see. It is not uncommon in any landlords that I'm aware of, and certainly my experience has been that everyone has some degree of overhold, partially because of other reasons for why overhold is being used. Sometimes because they're negotiating new agreements or new arrangements, and so they're just in overhold in the interim. In other cases, there are other uses that they want to put those properties to that overhold is just being used because they're just temporary measures to keep people. So it's hard to put an exact metric on this because different organizations have different priorities and different practices. But certainly ballpark is somewhere around the 5 to 10% mark.
Councillor Chattison, please.
Okay, thanks for that. And then I just want to turn back to the Auditor General. Of those 85 leases there, and I'm sorry, it's a big report. I don't have all the time in the world to get to every detail, so apologize if this is in there. How many of those 85 leases do you see that are significantly below market rate?
Auditor General, please. Oh.
So through the chair, I don't think we have a specific number at hand in terms of those leases. I suspect it's a fairly large number, actually. I think the other piece that, if I can also answer a question that was asked before with regards to how do the below market rents get approved. Staff do not have delegated authority to do any below market rents, and so council approves every single one of the below market rents. I do recognize that there are a lot of legacy ones, so can't necessarily speak to what has happened in the past, but certainly in terms of my tenure here at the city, that has never happened actually. So.
Okay, so I guess my concern would be for nonprofits like that are serving the overall good of the community and the goals of the city, and possibly them being part of these undervalued leases or whatever you want to call them. Any comments on that and the effects of, fulsome, look at this possibly negatively affecting those the position of some of those nonprofits to operate? Any comments there?
Councillor, are you directing this to the Auditor General then?
I think so.
Okay, Auditor General?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Geez, it's hard for me to recall what I said, but I'm thinking about the fact that we have nonprofits that probably that are operating for the good of the community, that are probably getting a break from the city if they're on city land, and I'm just trying to understand if we go to something that's more fulsome in analyzing and then charging everybody market rate, is that going to detrimentally affect a lot of these operations that actually serve the good of the community and look after sometimes the most vulnerable populations in our city in our efforts to clean up this so-called mess?
So through the chair, our point was more about creating the necessary transparency in below market. It's not currently transparent. You can't go to a website and find out who's getting this kind of subsidy, not that I know of. The other thing is the analysis that goes into determining what level of rent to charge below market. You're going to charge $1 a year, or you're going to charge that needs to be enhanced. The other thing I think that needs to be addressed and considered perhaps more carefully is who has fair access to that opportunity? How is the opportunity identified and allocated, if you will? It's the same thing as you're looking at grants, right? The enrichment fund. How do you decide who gets a break and who doesn't? Because there are perhaps more competing opportunities, or fewer opportunities available than there are those who would wish to have them or address them. I do want to address the earlier question about 8 million a year versus 2 million a year. If you recall, we only included in scope the standard lease agreements, not the complex ones. Those are outside of the scope. So while if you start including, the larger development agreements and all the rest of it, yeah, it would be 8 million. But in terms of the scope of our exercise, it's around 2 million. And so this arrears applies to that level.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. And I guess,
Sorry, city manager, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to redirect a portion of this related to licenses to GM Burden, because I think it will give you a fulsome look.
Thank you. GM Burden, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the Councillor. Councillor Patterson, recreation primarily operates through licenses, and in Q4, there will be a report coming forward that is a review of all third-party agreements, both for transparency, for council's information, to the point where you're asking about nonprofit organizations. One example is actually a report coming to council tomorrow with Community Living Hamilton, where we are recommending that they receive a discounted rate so that they can continue operations. That will be coming forward to ECS for review and approval, and is a mechanism for us to ensure that partnerships with groups that are doing good for the community but wouldn't be able to afford market rate would be able to continue their programming. Director Steve Savor is also on the line, should you have any further questions on the recreation side of the agreements and licenses.
Thank you, GM Burden. Last question now, Councillor Patterson?
did you call me mayor?
No,
No.
I didn't.
Okay. No, thank you very, very much for that. That helps me to kind of understand that. I think I guess the chief real estate officer said, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think that's what he was kind of getting at there. And I can respect that. And I could also respect the fact that he said that no lower than market rate leases are done without council approval. So I don't know if our council would have approved a lot of those leases, maybe previous councils. So I guess it's good that we're going to get that information, and I appreciate this report. And I just wanted to, make light that when we look at some of these things, thank you, GM Burden, for that explanation. That helps me understand that we do look at the bigger picture in dealing with this, and it's in a compassionate way that is best for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And ECS is this afternoon, so it's not tomorrow, it's this afternoon. All right, up now is Councillor Clark for a second time. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you. I did read the report. And on line 64, it deals with the review of lease agreement statuses. It indicates, according to the system, there were 366 lease agreements with different types of status as of this date. Including in there are overhold agreements, and that's where, for some reason, the lease has expired, and the tenant continued to pay month to month without the city renegotiating the lease. And it shows in a breakdown there, active, overhold, and recurring leases in Archibus, which is the software, as of December 23rd, 2022. It shows the numbers there that are really quite blank. So it's not just council being compassionate and saying you get a discounted lease or you don't pay at all, nominal leases at $2 a year, that type of thing. It's about the management of the system and the fact that no one was trying to deal with these overhold agreements. And that's disconcerting. That means someone dropped the ball. Don't know who, don't know why, but someone dropped the ball. And so of $2 million, $1.2 million is the issue. That's 50%. Thank goodness it's not 50% of the 8 million. But we need to fix it. So to your point earlier, Chair, one question to Mr. Zagaric, because I believe I heard him indicate Q1 of 2025 is when they were going to try to have their revised policies in place. Did I hear that correctly?
Through the chair, that is the target date, not to suggest we are waiting to Q1 of 2025. The intent is to reinforce that shared objective between corporate services and the client areas. So while accounts receivable typically works with the client areas with respect to licenses and leases as it relates to collections, we see where there is some areas for improvement in trying to realize the outstanding amounts. And so we would look to develop, enhance the procedures that are in place towards that shared goal. So the expectation is to have that developed by Q1 of 2025, but to start that work immediately.
And so to yourself or to the city manager, would it be possible that you present an interim report as to where you are on these changes that management has agreed to by December of this year? So in essence, in December, you get an interim report saying, okay, we're tackling these things systemically. We've gone through this one, this one, this one. Here's the changes. The more fulsome report will come back in the first quarter of 2025.
Through you, Madam Chair. So to your first point, I can answer simply yes, we will bring an interim report back. I think in a lot of these circumstances, that's a better approach anyway, so council can see where we're going, and I think that's something we should look at more broadly. Additionally, it's so important in these situations to demonstrate the accountability and the transparency in the evolution, both for council members and for the public. So fully committed to that piece. We were just consulting about the timeline on whether December or January would be better, just in light of the very varied number of priorities that there are, and to make sure we give something comprehensive. So I think it's more likely it would come forward in January, but we will attempt to bring it sooner if possible, hoping that that is agreeable to the members around the table.
Councillor?
I think it's reasonable, given all of the holidays that occurred during December. So if we could amend the recommendation that staff report back to Audit Finance Administration on the status of their work on the recommendations by, January 30, the end of January. And then the subsequent would be, I don't think we should put in when the final report's coming back, because we're getting the interim, and then we can speak to where you're going and whether or not we're all on side. I think it's important when we make these systemic and cultural reviews that the council is in tune with the senior leadership team. So leaving it until you come back with a full recommendation, here's how we're going forward, doesn't give council or committee the opportunity to say, yeah, but I think you might be missing this point. So having that more, you talk about an integrated system, having it integrated with council and committee is important. So I would make that recommendation that we have our interim report back by the end of January 2025.
Madam Clerk, could you put that up on the screen so we can take a look at it again?
Yes, give me a moment for that. Councillor Clark, did you want to add a C or did you want to revise B?
So B currently says that the General Manager of Planning and Economic Development, General Manager of Public Works, General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services, and General Manager of Community Services be directed to implement the management responses and report back to AFA by March 2025 on the nature and status of actions taken in response in the audit report.
You could potentially amend B to read, report back to Audit and Finance Administration Committee with an interim
Report.
status report by the end of January 2025, with the full report to be completed by March, end of March 2025. So you'd have one B. Does that make sense, Clerk?
Yes.
Do you have a seconder for this amendment? Councillor Taddison? Okay.
While the clerk is typing that up, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Do we have an estimated date when the report is coming back on the Waterfront Trust?
Auditor General, please.
Through the chair, I would say it's going to be at least a couple of months. It turned out to be a more comprehensive need. Originally, I was planning on just appending the information to this report, but it just wasn't doable without undue delay to this report. So I'd have to say, and for that, we're getting some outside expertise as well to help us.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, do you have the revisions? Is that something we can put on the screen at all? Okay. So as you can see, there is a bold that says, with an interim status report on the recommendations by end of January 2025, and with a final report by March 2025 on the nature and status of actions taken in response to the audit report. Are we all good with that? We have a mover and a seconder. May I have the vote, please?
This vote is just on the amendment?
Yes.
Oops. Bear with me for one moment. Mary needs to stop sharing her screen. There we go. And that was moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Taddison.
Yes. And the vote is up. That vote carries 8-0. Thank you. Councillor Crutch for a second time, please.
I just think it's important to clarify a piece of information that Councillor Taddison shared to make sure we all have it correctly. Based on page 18 of Appendix A in the table that Councillor Clark mentioned, we see, I think it's 100 and some leases that were in the current breakdown. Of those, I think it's nearly 40 that are in overhold, which would make it about 28% of current leases that are in overhold, not 10%. Can someone confirm that?
Auditor General, are you able to confirm that?
So I'm just looking at the page 19, 18 and 19. So now, bearing in mind that we had to revise these numbers, you've got a total of 85 leases, 31 of which are in overhold. So that's a significant percentage. And it's a similar number for licenses.
Councillor Crutch.
Thank you. I just want to make that point because I think it's starkly in contrast to what was presented as like, oh, you know, this is just a normal number that we might be having and it's the industry average. This is many times higher than what we're being told from a report says the industry average should be. I appreciate and understand that some of these things are happening since amalgamation, or there's some things that are out there that aren't in systems and we don't even know the leases exist and so on and so forth. And hopefully at some point since amalgamation, we had, you know, kind of tracked some of this stuff down. I see Auditor General Brown signaling, so I'll pause for a moment as I think he wants to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you, Chair. If you look on page 22 on the license side, now bear in mind that if you look at that chart on the left-hand side, originally in the system it said there were 131 active and 34 overhauls. But when we actually validated and verified, we revised that number. It was in fact 81 actives and 97 overhauls. So there you have more overhauls than you actually have current.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that further clarification, which is of course somewhat more alarming. I'm not going to work the percentages out for you, but we have more overhold leases and active leases. I guess what I'll say is, and I think that when we're presenting this information to the public, and especially when, and I appreciate Councillor Maureen Wilson's question to identify this, when it's sadly a member of the public or somebody else who uses our hotline to call in to identify this issue that leads to us doing a lease, investigation into leases and licenses, and we learn about this kind of thing. I'll just be very frank with you. It's great to hear from the Auditor General about this, and it's his job to be impartial and neutral about how he presents this information. And frankly, I don't know how he does it, but he does a great job of coming here, presenting neutral facts and talking about how we're going to move through this process to next steps. And I appreciate that perspective. But I just don't, I'll be honest, I don't hear a seriousness about how this is being taken. I just don't hear it. Like, this is pretty damning stuff here about how we're operating, including a loss of millions of dollars. And I'll be honest, I think it would have been great if we started out with like, look at this, like we take this very seriously, this is how we're dealing with this, these are the issues. That's just not the tone I've received today about this. I get that we're going to come back with a report in January. It'd be great to hear in that report exactly what we're doing to address this immediately, because I think it needs to be dealt with. I understand some of these challenges are software-related challenges, right? I get that some of these things are an opportunity from the cybersecurity incident, which is great.
Through you, Madam Chairman, to the councillor's comments, I do take this very as a serious matter, and one of the things I've asked for is a work plan or a reporting mechanism on what are we seeing in terms of both leases that the city leasing space or where the city is leasing out space. What are we looking at going into 2025 for those priorities, and to share that information with committee and council so there's an understanding of what is coming in the pipeline and how we are going to address this backlog of issues and to avoid any surprises where something suddenly comes to committee and the perception is it's at the 11th hour and a decision has to be made. The other change is also to be working with the other departments, so there's a better understanding, the client departments. So the corporate real estate office is actually sometimes acting on behalf of another department in terms of leasing that space. So it becomes much more of a joint initiative as opposed to just being seen as a real estate office doing this transaction, and a little bit more transparency and openness around that. So these are some of the short, from a work program changes, and to start making those changes. Parallel with that will be then implementing and responding to the recommendations of the auditor in terms of bigger process changes, but on a day-to-day activity. And then I think the other third thing, and staff can confirm, one of the challenges that the real estate office had is staff shortages. Some new staff have come on board, which is a very significant positive development for the team, so that they're better resourced in order to manage on the day-to-day activities. And that should also assist in terms of identifying the priorities, presenting that list, and outlining that, so committee and council will see what is the real estate office working on in terms of day-to-day lease administration, whether we're entering into a lease or managing lease where we're leasing out space, and sharing that information with the committee and council to avoid that situation where it's felt that things are coming at the last minute and committee and council isn't aware of what's coming down the pipeline. So I'd like to really have that roadmap so everyone has a good line of sight of what we are going to be working on, with the ideas, immediate needs, what do we need years 2 to 3 in terms of leasing and lease administration, and then the longer term. So the day-to-day activities of the group, at the same time that we're working with the other GMs and other departments to make the process changes that the auditor has identified. But to your initial comment, yes, we are treating these recommendations very seriously, and that we will be there will be changes being made in terms of on a day-to-day operating basis going forward. Thank you. The city manager may have additional comments. Sorry, I just wanted to highlight some of my current thought process and plans. Thank you.
City manager?
Through you, Madam Chair, and I think I need to reinforce this as well. So I had intended to say some concluding comments to reinforce our commitment. I'll say this form doesn't always lend itself that well because the auditor presents and then questions start. So it doesn't necessarily allow us to present how important this is. So let me restate just how important it is to us. I'm going to begin by saying that in fact, the real estate department had undertook some consulting before our Auditor General began. So it isn't that they weren't aware that something needed to happen, and they did begin that. Now, obviously, there are some significant things coming out of this, and it is important that we solve this, and we solve this promptly. But when these results came out, all of the senior leadership team, or almost all of them, sat around the table with me, and I facilitated a discussion because of the importance of this. So I want you to know that, because I think it is important that you see that we are invested in making these changes. So we are committed to addressing the Auditor General's recommendations. And there are areas that have been identified for improvement in administration and governance, and those are important. So we are committed to enhancing our processes and our systems as well, because it's absolutely necessary that we safeguard our city assets, that we maximize our revenues, and that we ensure compliance as we should. And so thank you to the Auditor General for his work on this, and thank you to staff as well for sitting around the table and making that commitment the day that we did. It's not great, obviously, when we find these things, but you have to draw a line in the sand and say, now we move forward and now we find ways to make ourselves better. And the audit helped us to identify those concerns, particularly the ones related to arrears and rental losses and things like that. So at a high level, I'll tell you the things that we intend to do. So first, we have to address the fragmented accountabilities, because that's a big issue. And so we've talked in some ways how to do that. There's more to talk about, how we bring that in, because it spans the whole corporation in many ways. There's identifying and having a lead oversight to this, and we have identified that as the real estate area, but bringing the others together, implementing new systems, documenting our procedures, and training people to make sure that they understand them. So some of the quick wins are the standard operating procedures and the training piece, and there are many others which my colleagues have spoken about. And then to reinforce the piece about accountability and transparency. So we believe and we will come back to council more regularly, so you're a part of this and you can see that we are moving forward, so the public can see that we're moving forward swiftly and effectively, and so that there's tracking of the progress. So the report's a valuable tool to us to help us to strengthen our city operations in this area, and we are 100% committed to making the changes that are needed. I've seen that in staff, and I do just want to acknowledge that while there are those issues, we still do have committed people who are here working very hard to achieve those things. So lots of work to do, lots of continuous improvement opportunities, but people are committed to making those changes.
Thank you, City Manager. Councillor Crutch?
Thanks. I think it's actually quite important to say that kind of stuff and to understand those. And I think, as a city manager, it'd be good to hear that stuff up front so that we understand the context of those kinds of things that happen. We see, of course, in the management responses what people are going to do to address these issues, but they're rather technical and verbose. It's a very long appendix, and I think when matters are this serious, it's good to hear from folks in terms of right up front what's going on. If we need to apologize, we apologize to the public, let them know that we care about this. And so thank you very much for your words, both GM Robichaud and City Manager Cloutier. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. For a third time now, Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. To the city manager's point, does the Auditor General have any objections to a change in the process when an audit is being presented to a committee, that the audit would be presented and directly after that, management would present their position, and then we would ask questions of both parties?
Auditor General?
I don't have any objection to that, as long as it doesn't delay the delivery of our report.
It should not. I mean,
Right.
you decide when you're delivering the report, and then staff have to be prepared to answer to the report, which is what the city manager is getting at. There should be that balance, and to be fair, I sit on a number of hearing boards, and that tends to be how a hearing happens. You get the one side, you get the other side, and then questions are asked. I have one last question. I thought I heard the Auditor General indicate that this started from, I'd use the term whistleblower. That may not be the most appropriate terminology, but could you clarify exactly what was the catalyst for you to begin this?
So through the chair, so this started off as a fraud and waste report and allegation. So another plug for the fraud and waste hotline. In the course of getting these complaints, we do get information that lends itself to informing us about particular risks that there may be out there, giving us ideas for audits. So while it wasn't directly, while it was an issue that we dealt with as an investigation in the course of doing that work, it gives us an opportunity to see how things are administered in certain areas, and that for us that signaled a need to go in and audit this area.
So would you feel comfortable indicating whether or not the whistleblower was a member of the public or an employee or former employee of the city of Hamilton?
I can't specifically recall where, but we do, I mean, it's a 50% chance that it was a member of the public, because 50% of our complaints, roughly speaking, come from the public, and including ideas for audit, as you know.
Yeah, it's often concerned me when members of our staff feel that the only way they can deal with an issue is to report it to the Auditor General. You would think that you'd be able to go up the line to your manager, and the manager would take it seriously and go up the line, and whoop-de-doo, we've got it fixed. But we got to go the backwards way because people are concerned about their job. And so we still haven't, I'm off topic, but I'll be really brief. We still haven't relayed to our employees sufficiently, in my humble opinion, that if you raise these concerns to upper management or regrettably to the Auditor General, there can be no punishment. We have a bylaw that clearly states that. And so we need to reiterate that throughout this process so that we start all rowing together. Anyways, thank you. I'm happy with where we are.
All right, thank you, Councillor Clark. I thought that your point and your question around how management can respond to these audit presentations, I do see that Clerk Trenum is up in the corner. Perhaps that's a little bug in his ear about that, and I see a nod. Wonderful. We do currently have a mover and a seconder, so Councillor Crutch and Councillor Alex Wilson. If there are no more questions, I'd like to call the vote, please.
So this is on the report as amended.
Yes, report as amended. And the vote is up.
It's just, we're very slow right now. I can tell you that it was carried 8-0, though.
Thank you. So that vote carries. Thank you. Let's move on to consent items. 9.1 is the annual tax arrears as of December 31st, 2023. I know that this is probably a result of several gremlins and robots in the making. So I wonder if I could ask GM Zagaric to give us just reasons why this has come so late in the year.
So through the chair, it is a annual report, and it is a little later than in previous years, in part because of the city's cyber incident and the need to respond to the city incident. Happy to provide a bit of an overview if that's the will of committee.
Is it the will of committee for an overview? Can't tell with your mask, so I'm not really sure if you're mouthing something. Oh, okay. No overview, we will go straight to questions then. I already recognize that Councillor Spatafora was quick on the draw, and then we'll have Councillor Maureen Wilson, please. Councillor Spatafora.
Thank you, Chair. And is it okay if it's not a question and it's just a comment? I appreciate that. When you look at Table 1, I think for me, it's pretty alarming when you see the increase in the total arrears number. I think the increase for 2023 is 26.80%. We went from $72 million to $91 million. And for me, I think it's just a reminder that I think affordability is becoming a major issue. And I know people are going to say, well, it's just, you don't want to spend any money and you don't want to invest. It's not about investing when you can't afford it. I can't invest if I don't have the money to invest. So I wanted to bring that number to light. I think it's a scary number. And I think if we can't find a way to manage and balance out investments and the affordability of our residents, we are heading down a scary path. But that's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if I could, through you, showing my ignorance, but if I'm looking at Table 4, for example, on page 6, and I'm seeing the increase in arrears in what generally one would describe as wards, for example, that have more rental properties than, say, my colleague to the left of me in Ward 14. There's been a lot of items on the news over the last 2 years. I am getting to a question. I am trying to put it into context. And it has to do with our interest rates, where we saw a number of property owners complaining about them losing their assets because of property taxes. But when the news pursued it a little more, they were finding out that the individual owned multiple properties. And we've been told that 75% of property owners already own at least one property. So I guess my question is there anything that this data tells us of the person who's going into arrears? Are they multiple property owners? Are they a single property owner? Does our system and it have the capacity in which to identify that? Through the chair. Bless you.
Bless you. You okay? All right. GM Zagarek, please.
Through the chair, I can start, and I'll invite staff if they have any content to expand and share. We don't have definitive information as it relates to the profile of property owners who are in arrears. We do include on page 7 of 15 some anecdotal references to issues that we attribute to factors relating to the arrears. The councillor made reference to market conditions and interest rates, and we fully expect market conditions is a contributing factor to carrying costs in the arrears. And I'll just quickly, if I can, just draw your attention to table 3 and the importance of a time series and the value of the time series. Table 3 highlights during the pandemic when one might have expected that arrears would increase. In fact, we saw our arrears decrease.
Yep.
And 2 factors is lower borrowing costs, but maybe more importantly, subsidy from senior levels of government that guaranteed income, that allowed property owners to meet their obligations. And now we've gone into a different cycle with higher carrying costs, higher borrowing fees, and less of that direct subsidy. The other factor is we're seeing fewer transactions. And that may sound strange, but when a property transacts that has arrears, that those arrears are resolved. And that may be a contributing factor if you see in terms of Ward 3 and the history of Ward 3, as properties increase in transactions and as more properties in the more affordable part of the municipality may transact, then that may be a contributing factor to the declining trend of arrears, for example, in Ward 3. So again, some anecdotal evidence, but no definitive information that we can mine from our systems.
Councillor?
Thank you. I'm not sure I understood that last part. So if I could just go through it a different door to my hypothesis, just getting clarity. Person A speculated, bought a number of properties, was enjoying what we all call now the financialization of housing, assumed rental properties, primarily in downtown areas. Lo and behold, interest rates go up, and those rising interest rates also put a shadow on the number of transactions because fewer people are buying and selling when interest rates are higher. And as a consequence, your financial path on what you thought you were going to do doesn't really work out because you've got a growing list of assets where you can't afford the monthly mortgage because of interest rates. And the lowest thing that is affected is your property taxes. You're just, you got to meet some things. You got to meet your mortgage first. You have maybe a little bit more grace on the property taxes, And that's what we're seeing. I'm just not clear from Mr. Zagaric, and it's not his explanation, it's my understanding of whether we can say that's an issue or not. I understood the point about during COVID, and I think Mr. Steve Pomeroy made that point very clear to us, the importance of income in terms of housing crisis. But I am trying to understand whether I could make that, we could hypothesize that this is financialization at work here.
Jan?
Yeah, through the chair, that is a reasonable point. And I'll extend it as well, though, to property owners, occupants. In the current real estate market, if they are having a difficult time transacting their property because of market conditions and have arrears, it's not until those market conditions provide some relief that that transaction will occur and those arrears will be resolved.
Counselor?
Thank you. So I just, I'm not trying to at all discount the importance and the role of affordability here, but I am trying to maybe shine a light on the role of our capacity to provide quality services, continue to invest necessarily in our core assets, but sometimes these measures are not a reflective of our work. It's a reflection of macro economic systems at work, and it's more a reflection of that. I'm just trying to put some context into it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Up now is Counselor Clark, followed by Counselor Crutch. Counselor Clark, please.
So is there a way of understanding on tax arrears, how many are in tax arrears from, for example, in the report, it speaks to, as Councilor Maureen Wilson mentioned, more than one property. So people are commodifying the house. The people who are living there can't afford to pay the rent. When they can't afford to pay the rent, then the guy that owns the property can't afford to pay the taxes because he didn't get the rent. He's got to pay the mortgage on the property to which he's not getting the rent, and the cycle continues. Do we have any indication, for example, on rental properties, if that's become an issue?
Through the chair, to what I interpreted the first question is, there's no way for staff to discern in our system with respect to properties that individuals who may hold more than one property. For instance, someone could have a different registration, different Ontario number, but hold different properties in City of Hamilton. There could be different ownership conglomerates. So again, no simple way to definitively identify where an individual holds multiple properties.
Counselor Clark?
Thank you for that. For me, what I took from Table 4 is property breakdowns in arrears per ward. You can see pretty clearly that the economic conditions of the time impacts on the ability of people to pay their property taxes. And so while we want to increase the level of services in some areas, the real challenge is how much pressure are we putting on the average person? And what I've experienced in my conversations with residents in my ward is that they're victims of a number of things. They're victims of, they didn't have a pension. About 50% of Canadians don't have a pension. Might even be a little bit higher than that. So they're living on CPP, they're living on old age security. And when you look at the taxes on the property being approximately $4,000 to $5,000 in my ward, a little bit higher for other properties, but some of those folks are the people that didn't have a pension, and now they're retired. They're trying to stay afloat, and when it comes to paying bills, they have to decide, do they eat? Do they pay the rent? Do they pay their taxes? or not the rent, do they pay their electricity? Do they pay their taxes? And more people, when I'm out and about in the community, are sharing that dilemma. So we just need to be mindful of it, that individuals are experiencing hardship, and we have to be very careful with how much of an increase we put on the tax load, because it filters down every single time to the individual property taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Up now is Councillor Crutch, please.
I think I heard what you saying, Jim Zagarek, and I guess a piece maybe I didn't see in this report or missing, or, because you don't have the data or whatever it might be, is generally speaking how development impacts this. Some of the things have to do with timing. So when a new development comes online, and there was an increase in new developments happening, those tax arrears are pretty much guaranteed to happen because of all the transitional things that need to occur for people moving in, people who, whatever it might be. The building might be here, it might be empty, people haven't moved in yet, these kinds of things. I know you can't track all that data, but I'm wondering if you have data about, generally speaking, there being more arrears relative to there being more properties to be taxed. And I think it's captured here in some way, but it's just a little bit eluding me slightly, and I wonder if you could just really point directly to that number so I can understand the relationship between that and the overall number.
So through the chair, table 4 is an example where we do try to capture arrears 3 years plus. So these are properties that are at risk, for instance, of progressing to a tax sale. And the percentages really reflect relative to the total number of properties within that ward. So to the councillor's comment with respect, if there is growth within the ward, we try to capture it in that percentage number. So the absolute number could message or identify a concerning trend, but relative to if there's growth within that ward over the 5-year period, significant growth, is we try to capture it as a percentage to sort of normalize for that factor.
Thanks, that's extremely helpful additional insight from you reading that specific table, because I looked at it and was like, I think what you're saying is, if I understand and read it correctly, if we just use Ward 2 as an example, in January 2020, there were 1.44% were 3 years or more, or properties in 3 years plus arrears, and then that number changes over the years. It's not cumulative, we're talking about a picture in each one of the years, and that's very helpful. I think it's also helpful to say, look where we're seeing most of those cases with what I call sustained unaffordability. Because what you're seeing when you get to a point where people are multiple years in arrears, there's probably something going on there that reflects what Councillor Spatafor and Councillor Clark were speaking to. But let's look closely at the wards where that was the biggest case. It's always going to be in that band of 2, 3, 4 are the highest ones across those years, right? And so I think that's important to also reflect on when we talk about affordability in our city. We do see some other, I call them, aberrations here. If you look across them, there's little things here and there that stand out from time to time, but that's where the trend is. And I completely understand that that's an issue for folks in the lower city. We see the incomes and the annual incomes from the census, and they're dramatically different than they might be, say, for instance, specifically in Ward 14, where we know the average income is a lot higher. So I think putting that context into this is important too, to see where it is, and I really appreciate that it's been broken down this way so we can see that trend over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll be, I think that what we're going to do is we're going to take all the consent items together at the very end. So let's move on to 9.2, the annual assessment appeals as of December 31st, 2023. Are there any questions on this item? Again, it's an annual report. Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Yes, I was able to clarify some things with staff offline, so I'm mostly just seeking to put this on the record a little bit or better understand what's going on with Appendix B when it comes to the pits and quarries and the $0 value there. Maybe if staff could just talk about that and what's going on in this report, because of the 26 outstanding pieces, 12, so just under half, are of one very specific type, and that's zeroed out, and wondering if staff could expand on what's going on with those that makes them different from everything else in the report.
Thank you. GM Zagarek.
So through the chair, I'll provide a bit of a summary of the 2023 and 2024, and then if there are some specifics, I'll invite staff to share some of the specific details as it relates to these 12 properties. In 2023, the city appealed 12 properties as it relates to gravel pits, and we appealed the impact returned assessed value of those properties in that it was our opinion that those assessments were undervalued. And so that appeal is ongoing for 2023, and so consequently, there's procedurally it carries forward for 2024 because that appeal hasn't been resolved. However, in 2024, and sorry, let me just share what the current value assessment of those 12 properties were in 2023. In 2023, their current value assessment was $28.4 million, and the city realized a municipal tax benefit of about $464,000 against that assessed value. In 2024, MPAC revised the returned assessment values for those 12 properties. Those 12 properties increased in CVA from $28.4 million to $44.6 million in 2024. So a 57% increase in their assessed values. The city's municipal tax benefit therefore increased by approximately $565,000, or about 122%. I'm not suggesting MPAC's actions resulted from the city's appeal, just providing that sort of assessment in terms of what's transpired in the last 2 years. And then I'll invite any city staff if there's any more specific information. But again, the appeal is ongoing as it relates to 2023. That captures 2024 as well. We are reviewing the appropriateness of MPAC's returned assessment for 2024. And finally, just wanting to thank council for your continued support on this effort. We have engaged external experts to assist us in this file, and so we are actively participating, and you see the results through this report of that effort.
Thank you. And I think a piece of that is, so in this report where we're talking about the estimated loss to the city, because it's the opposite. It's not someone appealing their rate to the city and saying, hey, tax me lower. It's the city saying, no, your valuation's wrong, let's go higher. There's not an estimated loss that's zero, but there is a number that I'm sure is confidential because it's ongoing with legal, but there is a positive number that should be there. We just maybe, it's not there. Just maybe if that is the case, in future iterations of this report, would it be possible, again, the specific number, I understand is a confidential piece because we're actively in a court settlement about it with that MPAC appeal, but just wondering how this could be designated to show the risk is not in lost income, but the risk is unrealized increases, if that makes sense.
So through the chair, I'll just rely on the information I just shared. So in terms of the magnitude of the benefit of the change in the assessed role, it's about 122% increase in the municipal property taxes, or an increase of about $565,000. Again, I'm not attributing MPAC's decision to revise the assessed value to the city's appeal, just citing, just as it relates to those two factors, what the benefit is to local taxpayers. And just in terms of local taxpayers, the benefit is when the city has these types of outcomes, it reduces the reliance we have on existing taxpayers.
Thank you. I think the only other two questions from me is, would staff be able to provide just a very high level, why did we disagree with MPAC's assessment for 23, and are there other years under discussion? So did something change in 2023 that we said, no, this assessment's not there? Because MPAC hasn't changed their valuation, is my understanding, until 2024. So what are there previous years under appeal, and why are we appealing MPAC's valuation in the first place?
Through the chair, we can share that information. It's public information, and the two factors staff shared is the assessed value and the classification of those properties. So we can share that information with committee.
Do you mean to share it in a report? Do you mean to share it verbally? How do you mean to share it?
through the chair, if I can offer to share it via an email.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes. And I think just maybe a last piece, and I know this one's fine, it's in the public record, is are there other municipalities that have done the same thing in terms of appealing pits and quarries, say our neighbors? I think this is an important one, just given the total amount here. My understanding is, say, for example, Wellington County brought in $4 million in back taxes from their MPAC appeal. Are there other examples nearby, or is that kind of what roughly what we're trying to do a similar thing in the city is maybe what I'm asking? It's just, when you just see the $0 column, I think folks are maybe missing that about half of our ongoing appeals are specific to one property type. In a neighboring municipality, that one property type just got $4 million in back taxes over their appeals. Just trying to daylight as much of this as possible without crossing that line here.
So through the chair, that is the other jurisdiction that we are familiar with. The councillor is correct. That's the only other jurisdiction we are familiar with that appealed.
Thank you. I'm excited for that more information, and I know our appeals are ongoing and have kind of been continuously delayed, so just excited to stay in the loop, and hopefully we can do a bit of public reporting when we're on the other side of those appeals. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Seeing as there are no other speakers, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive items 9.1 and 9.2? Councillor Spatafora, Councillor Taddison. Like to call a vote, please. And the vote is up. And that vote carries 8-0. Thank you. We are moving on to discussion items. 10.1 Governance Review Subcommittee Report 24-001 on September the 13th. May I have a mover and a seconder to put this report on the floor, please? Councillor Crutch, Councillor Spatafora. Any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none. May I have your vote, please? This is to approve the recommendations within the report. And the vote is up. Vote carries 8-0. Thank you. We are now moving on to motions. 11.1 is the Ward 2 Community Grants for Q3 2024. Councillor Crutch, please introduce your motion respecting the Ward 2 Community Grants and your seconder, please.
Failed to ask for a seconder, so looking around, Councillor Spatafora has offered to do it, so thank you. Briefly here, just want to talk a bit about how we're changing and shifting this program to make it a bit more responsive, open, and transparent. So when we first did this, we were doing it based on a council recommendation that came from 2018 for our grants program. And we also have access, of course, in Ward 2 to something called, sort of just colloquially called, cell tower funds. So there are funds that come from renting mobile towers for people to connect to their cell phones from mobile companies, and those are also stored. And what we've been doing, like Councillor Nan's been doing, is using a lot of those funds for food security issues, whether it be for school programs, other kinds of issues, helping food banks, that kind of thing in Ward 2. And so we actually have started to include those requests as part of our Ward 2 community grants so that they come through the same open process, and it's easier for people to just apply for those kinds of things. So some of those are part of this request. We're going to be moving to, I think, probably in 2025, is all requests for any spending from area rating funds will come through a process that's on our website. Right now, it's sort of ad hoc. If someone's got a not-for-profit, like City Housing Hamilton, we did a big motion to give $850,000 to support buildings in Ward 2. But that came as a result of them reaching out, us having a conversation. But if the average group out there who's also eligible for receiving area rating funds doesn't know what that process looks like, it gets a bit arbitrary at some point. So we're continuing to try and make this more transparent and open and allow there to be a process for the public to just kind of apply, go through something that makes sense and vetted by staff as an application process, and then go through this process to have it approved. That's it. This is just the latest round of community grants, but wanted to provide that nuance so that you knew where this was headed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions on this motion? Seeing none, may I have a vote, please? Vote is up. Vote carries 8-0. Thank you. Moving on to notices of motion, Councillor Alex Wilson, please introduce your notice of motion respecting the Ward 13 community grants, and I understand you would like to waive the rules.
Yes, me and my team missed, I think, by about 90 minutes with Clerk Bates, the agenda being published. And as a result, the reason is specifically one of the groups mentioned the Terry Fox run, they just had their programming part of closing out their account. There is a time sensitivity to this one, given council approvals a week from now. So as opposed to pushing this 3 weeks from now, as to the time they can actually start getting their funding, closing their accounts as a largely volunteer amount. So that's the urgency piece, and apologies to the clerk and to committee. Couple hours, but still that counts. So there we go. We need to waive the rules.
Seconder?
Oh, seconder for waiving the rules. Oh, I'm getting a big smile from Councillor Spatafor. Excited to take him up on it.
Okay, excellent. May I have the vote to waive the rules, please? And the vote is up.
No, waiving the rules for the Terry Fox run, not because I was late. There's a reason.
And that is carried 8-0. No 30 seconds, none whatsoever. Now about your actual
For
motion.
simplicity, I think if Councillor Spatafor is okay, I'll keep him on as the seconder. Yeah.
Very generous that way.
It's the same thing we got. We don't have multiple funding accounts in Ward 13. We only have the Tower Fund. Similar to the other processes here, community groups reach out to our office. We have a dedicated intake process. We have multiple deadlines. So this is both 2 and 3. We work with groups to help them get to a place where we can fund them if they reach out early enough. That's what happened this time. In our previous round, Q1, we did turn some folks away because they reached out with an application that wasn't qualified for funding. If folks reach out early enough, we kind of say, nope, you need a nonprofit holding organization. So you see things like that where the Dundas Museum stepped up to help with a local artist tour, so it's still staying within their programming. And just really excited about all the community collaboration that's come forward. I think because this is a notice, I do have to read it a little bit more, or I'm looking at the clerk for summary. We put it on, it's on the agenda, or does this all need to be read out word by word?
It's on the agenda if you can.
Thank you. So high level, there's 8 groups getting funding. They've applied through the community grants process. One of the ones I just want to shout out and exciting, the Dundas Little Theaters Youth Program Pilot has been full for weeks that they're funding with this. So they've launched a Teens Getting Engaged in Theater in collaboration with the DVSS. That's a program they weren't able to offer before because they just are a growing organization. That program's now at full capacity. So really, really exciting. Hope we can move forward with these today. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this motion? Seeing none, may I have the vote, please? And the vote is up. And that vote carries 8-0. Thank you. Now we are on to adjournment. Oh my gosh, that was like right off the hop. Councillor Spatafor, Councillor Taddison. We're not going to talk about this, right? Right? Okay, please. May I have the vote, please? And the vote is up. And that vote carries. Thank you very much. See you at the next AFA, and have a great rest of your day.